How long has Mr. Osborn been like this? Well, it's been like this for a while now. The man is obsessed with his lobster.
You're fond of me lobster. Say it. Say it. Danny! Let Neptune strike ye dead, Winslow.
What is up, Flick fans? Welcome back to my channel. It is Spider-Man week. I've already talked No Way Home non-spoilers. A spoiler review is coming, but right now I want to count down my least to most favorite Spider-Man movies, including the two Venom films. We're kind of doing the whole Spider-Man universes type ranking, but the best thing about these videos is me seeing your all's comments down below. So please, let me know, what is your list of Spider-Man films, and where does No Way Home come in? Of course, let me know once you've seen the film, but if you haven't seen it, don't worry, I'm not going to be spoiling that movie in this video. When I get to it, I'll talk about it, but where does it come in? Also, if you guys like these rankings, be sure to drop your thumbs up down below, and by doing that, it lets me know that you'd like me to re-rank all of the Marvel Cinematic Universe movies, something I'm contemplating on doing this weekend. Subscribe, all that good stuff. Hey, Austin, get to the ranking. Let's do it. At the bottom of this list. Now, this one was tough because I've shuffled this decision multiple times. I've had, I believe, up to 3 different movies in this spot, and even at this spot, right, I don't really hate any of the Spider-Man films. I know people have issues with Amazing Spider-Man 2, Spider-Man 3, the Venom films, and a lot of that has to do with the sloppiness, the messiness, the inclusion of so many different villains, but going back and rewatching the ones that were in competition for this spot, I've decided to go with Spider-Man 3. Now, my reasoning behind putting this at this spot is not because I dread and hate every moment of watching this movie. That's not the case. I think there's a lot about this film that resonates, sticks with you, and it's a great message for Peter Parker himself. With great power comes great responsibility. No, beyond that, it's putting himself above others and understanding that you have a responsibility to do what's right, even if it's not going to make you happy. But we also have a villain in this story that I believe has so much to him that was hit upon, never fully explored. We're talking about Sandman and even Sam Raimi. I watched an interview just this morning where he's talking about the fact that he wanted to do so much with this film, yet do so little, and let the simplicity speak for itself, allow the movie to focus on Sandman. But then the studio comes in and says, well, we want Venom, and we want Topher Grace, who, in my opinion, isn't the worst. Especially rewatching this movie years later, I'm like, he's fine. He doesn't really fit the role of Eddie Brock, but he's fine in the movie. What stands out about this film is just the fact that, and we're going back to what Sam Raimi said, I fit too much into it. And because of that, it's a mess. And Sam, I agree with you, buddy. I love your trilogy as a whole, but I feel like there's too much in this movie to make for a cohesive experience. And then I get into my nitpicks and gripes. There's so much about what's going on in the background of this film, from the extras to the over-exaggerated reactions to the ridiculousness in the dialogue and some silly, silly line delivery from the villains. And all of that, you know, it somewhat fits into this universe because this is a franchise that goes for cheese, and oftentimes I respond to that. I love it. Even going back and watching the ones from the early 2000s, I have such a good time with them. And this one wasn't a train wreck, but it just never came together at the end of the day. And unfortunately, it's at the bottom of my list. But a movie that goes slightly above that is the first Venom movie. Now, stay with me here. I know a lot of people would put Amazing Spider-Man 2 in this spot, but I have to be honest with you guys and say, upon rewatch, I would nudge the Amazing Spider-Man 2 slightly over this because I just feel like the first Venom film never fully delivers on its potential. Now, what it's doing is trying to capitalize on the silliness of the tone and putting that above the seriousness and above kind of what I wanted from this character, and that's more in the horror genre, but you're PG-13, you can't do much beyond that. You can show a lot of things off-screen, and they kind of do that. I think they do it a lot more with the second movie. But what I enjoyed about this film is Tom Hardy and that relationship with the symbiote. Hardy is amazing, right? The story around him and our villainous character, it all comes together to create for a third act that we've seen countless times before. And even with Riz Ahmed playing Carlton Drake and his enthusiasm that often goes into his roles, I wasn't really feeling his villainous character, and it's a very forgettable series of events in the third act. So when we get those huge symbiote-on-symbiote action scenes, those weren't delivering on the level that, one, I had hoped they would, but two, on the level of what Hardy's doing with that symbiote relationship and the dialogue that comes from that, the one-liners, the ridiculousness, the fun that comes from those moments and those scenes, and that's what I love about the first Venom movie. Again, it's another Spider-Man related film that I was slightly disappointed by, but there's so much fun that comes from Hardy's investment in this character. I enjoyed numerous moments about this movie. Next up, here it is, The Amazing Spider-Man 2, a film that has so much potential within what it's trying to do, whether it be the death of Gwen Stacy or giving us some great, very classic Spider-Man villains, you know, trying to give us the Rhino, attempting to do Electro justice, and Jamie Foxx as the character is really good. My issue is the writing for the character falls short, and you have those side villains like Rhino that just, they're so over the top on a level that doesn't quite fit with the rest of the movie. And then, of course, you have what happens with Harry, a transition that is so quick, so fast. I could say, you know, I love what the Raimi trilogy did with Harry because they build him up over multiple movies, and even though the execution with his character in that third and final film didn't quite work, at least he had the build-up. This time around, we're trying to give us the relationship between he and Peter in about 30 to 45 minutes, and then you have that turn, and then you have what happens with Gwen. Now, that third act, the finale, the way it all wraps up, is awesome. And I'm talking truly one of the greatest moments we've seen in any Spider-Man film. I loved it. The death of Gwen will go down as just a truly emotionally impactful death and one that resonates with me. And there are so many great things, like the battle with Electro, right? Electro himself as a character, I wish the writing was just a bit better. Jamie Foxx does a good job. The battle's great. The music is something that, you know, they could go a little bit overboard with the whispers and the talking with Electro's theme song. But I think the music in the movie is great. And then the web swinging, Spider-Man's web swinging. And this is what really stuck with me this time around and why it's moved up my list just a little bit. I was climbed up my list, another Spider-Man pun. I was obsessed rewatching this film with the way that Spider-Man was swinging through New York and just the look and the visuals. It is truly a visual spectacle. Like, I love the way this movie looks. And for the most part, some of these other Spider-Man films, I'm missing the style, and I don't quite get something that feels like this movie does. So many good things to talk about. Again, they rush through a lot of storylines, and they're trying to set up for another movie. Come on, Sony. We've seen that countless times. It never works, and it doesn't work again in this film. It's a stuffed movie, so I don't love it, but I like it more than I did, and that's saying something. So if you haven't seen Amazing Spider-Man 2 in a while, yes, there's a lot of things to tear apart, but there's also some things in there that allowed it to come to this spot on my list. Venom, Let There Be Carnage. This sequel does for me what I wish the first movie did, and that's embrace the lunacy and madness. Now, a lot of that is Woody Harrelson as Carnage. Man, he is so over the top. But again, you know, I kind of like the cheesiness of it all. I didn't really embrace it as much in the first movie, but this time, they know what they are. They understand what they're doing. Andy Serkis, I thought, did an okay job directing this. Now, does Carnage still spout out one-liners? Yes. Do some of the ridiculous moments get overly ridiculous? Yeah, they do. And that's really unfortunate, but I love that side of the film. And then you have Venom himself and Hardy just carrying over what we loved so much about the first movie, and that works extremely well. I will say, beyond Hardy and the symbiote, some of the dialogue just isn't the best with the way that it's presented and constructed, but at least they know the tone, they kind of know what they're going for, and they keep it consistent. But the fact the movie is so self-aware as to what it is trying to be, I can appreciate and respect that. And you know, the action throughout, it's fine, but then you get to that final battle, and oh my goodness, Venom versus Carnage. Even though you know exactly what's going to happen, so in that way, it's predictable. I was loving every second of it. Super fun, and the post-credits scene, yeah, pretty cool. Then we get to Andrew Garfield's first outing as Spider-Man. I was so excited about this. Sad to see Toby leave, of course, but to see them take on a new iteration of the character was super cool. Okay, right? The movie is attempting to be epic, and at points it reaches that. At other points, I wasn't quite sure what it was trying to be, and the entire storyline with the lizard does get a little bit silly. But I really, really enjoyed Andrew's very personal journey in this movie. And something I didn't mention earlier, another issue I had with The Amazing Spider-Man 2 is they try to lean so hard on his storyline with his parents and the fallout of that, and it felt like it didn't belong in the film. You scrap that, you save about 20 minutes, and you have a more focused movie. This film feels way more focused than its sequel because it's just giving us the rise to Spider-Man, his rise to being the character. And you're getting that relationship between he and Gwen Stacy. And what happens to Captain Stacy resonates with him, and I love the fact that it does long after this film, but that epic fallout, that epic battle, and then just the chemistry that Andrew has with Emma Stone, it is incredible. And their relationship is really what makes both of these movies work so well. So going back and watching this first film was a better time than even I anticipated. Again, it's not a great movie because it never fully owns and embraces what kind of movie it could have been. But for the most part, Andrew as this character is genuinely good, and I love seeing his banter, his quips, and he embraces the role of Spider-Man. You can tell he has a passion for it. Next up, our first Tom Holland entry on this list, that is Spider-Man Far From Home. And now we're getting into the films that I'm starting to feel a lot more strongly about. I really enjoy Far From Home. I do. I know, some people take issue with the Mysterio twist. Oh, they're just doing the thing that Iron Man 3 did again. But for me, it's all about execution and the fact that audiences are fully aware Mysterio is a bad guy. And sure, Marvel's changed things like that before. So we kind of saw that twist coming. But it's the way they do it. It's the way that Gyllenhaal owns this character. And now looking back after the events of No Way Home, I'm not going to spoil anything, we could look at Mysterio as maybe one of Spider-Man's greatest on-screen villains because he's the reason why all of this happens in the next movie. You could even say he's one of the first stepping stones for the multiverse as a whole because of what happens, the fallout of his actions spawns what happens in No Way Home, and that kind of spawns what happens everywhere else. And who knows, maybe Multiverse of Madness. So I'm like, all right, Mysterio, that's a good villain. That's a really good villain. It's one of those villains you look back on and you're like, wow, that was awesome. But so many things to love and praise about this film. You have Mysterio's actions, the battles, the mental battles between he and Spider-Man. See, we don't often get those mental battles. We're getting, hand-to-hand combat action, and we really get a ton from the first movie. So I'm like, okay, we're going to get that in this film. And we didn't. But we do get some really cool mind game battles. It almost reminded me of like a Professor X getting into someone else's head, but it all comes from the illusion tech. And speaking of the illusion tech, I like the fact that they updated it, and he's not a magician. He's using the Stark technology. And then you have the Peter stuff in high school. I will say that aspect of the film, the first 25 minutes, the comedy isn't as there as it was in Homecoming. I just wasn't laughing as much, and I didn't care as much about those moments as I did all of the stuff happening with Mysterio and that side of Peter's story. So it was almost the opposite of Spider-Man Homecoming. I will also say that MJ in this film, I like her and that relationship so much more. I felt the chemistry there. Overall, I still think Far From Home is a rock-solid Spider-Man film. I enjoyed it, and it sets up so many things to come. Welcome to my childhood. I was 7 years old. I remember watching this in the living room. I believe it was my second or third time. We had it on VHS. I'm like fake swinging through the room. I'm looking at my mom. I'm like, oh my God, it's Spider-Man. Like, I want to be Spider-Man. Why can't I be? Well, now I guess I am. Not really, but I want to be Spider-Man. And the feeling that I got watching Tobey do what he did in that film, and all of these years later, watching it back, yes, it's cheesy. Yes, it still has the background characters in Spider-Man 3, the overreacting extras in the movie, even though I do love, like, you mess with one of us, you mess with all of us, and the whole New York thing. It's so silly. But Raimi embraces the silliness, some of that, like, comic book silliness, right? And goes for it with this movie. Absolutely rocks it in this film, man. I can't tell you how much I loved rewatching this movie because I get those nostalgic moments. Nostalgia trumps all. But I will say, even with this being super nostalgic and loving Dafoe and loving those relationships and repeating the lines as I'm watching, I genuinely believe the style that Sam Raimi injects into this movie, not all of the cinematography is there, but there's a lot that resonates and works, and it's all about Peter, the growth, the rise to the human Spider-Man, and how he comes about these powers. What a really good movie, and the fact that it holds up, I'll say holds up after all these years, is so cool, man. I'm a huge fan. I grew up with it. Then you have Spider-Man Homecoming, a film that isn't necessarily an origin story because we've already seen Spider-Man in Civil War, and that this is only a Spider-Man movie tier list, not Spider-Man's appearances. Otherwise, Civil War would be really far up this list. But I really love how it goes back through that, and then it brings us home. It brings back Peter to high school, and we're getting to experience high school through his eyes. And whether that be the girls that he's falling for, the friendship with Ned, the fact that he's developing this awesome relationship with a couple of people in his school, he's seen as a nerd. We get Flash and all of these characters that we know from the comics, and all of that and the comedy that comes from that works much better in this movie than Far From Home, in my opinion, is handled with such care. And even though I won't say John Watts' style is as good as Raimi's, or maybe even Mark Webb's, his care and meticulous way of constructing this character is awesome. He has such a stranglehold on Tom Holland as Peter Parker, and we get everything we need to know about him from this movie. Now, I know the complaint is often spawning from the fact that Iron Man's in this film, and, it's Iron Man Jr. and the suit and all that stuff. And I'm like, okay, I understand that to a degree. I would love to see this version of Spider-Man stripped back and, kind of being what we know from some of the comics. Now, other comics, you could take things from other comics and kind of apply them to what Tom Holland's Spider-Man is, and it fits, and he fits, and he's a great mesh of what we love from Andrew and Toby. But Iron Man really isn't in the movie. I think someone said he's in the movie for like 10 minutes, if that. It just feels, you feel that presence so much more. But it doesn't distract me because Holland still owns the character. We still get all the moments that we need with him. You have an awesome villain in Vulture, in Michael Keaton's just epic and amazing, intimidating presence in this film. And the moment he realizes who Spider-Man is, and you get that this guy is way smarter than anyone's going to give him credit for, what a villain, right? The action scene at the end, it's not the best I've ever seen. It was fine, but it's all of that emotion, all of the weight behind it. This film has a lot of emotional weight. That's one thing I can say about another movie we're going to talk about, but Homecoming does a great job of that. So I thoroughly enjoyed this film, but I have to say, as much as I love Homecoming and Far From Home, the next movie on this list is Spider-Man No Way Home. I think it's the best of the trilogy. Now, again, this is after just one watch, right? And I'm going to go back, I'm going to see it more, and it's definitely in that competition of that 2 spot. So, we'll see how it holds. It's going to hold up well. I can tell you right now it's going to hold up well. But Spider-Man No Way Home is at this spot because I just feel like it does so much for this character. Without spoilers, and I said it in my review, so I'm not going to repeat myself. I'm not going to talk too much, okay? I will just say it is always focused on Peter. Peter is learning, growing, maturing emotionally, and he's kind of turning into that character from an emotional standpoint that almost everyone's wanted to see from him. Still a little bit of silliness, the relationship between he and MJ, between he and Ned, between he and Aunt May, all of that is there, and a lot of it's in the first half of the movie, even though I feel like the first half of the film takes a bit to find its footing, but once it does, it takes off, and it takes us on a journey that is unlike anything else this year. And a lot of it rides on the nostalgia of having the villains and all of that stuff, and that's all good and fun, but I don't care. Again, nostalgia comes in, and it just trumps all, but it's all about how it's handled, right? You can use the word fan service, but yes, I expected it to be a lot of that, but what I didn't expect is the emotional weight behind all of that, and actually giving us a story that is so well constructed. Like, I have no clue how they did this, Because I watched this movie, and I'm a huge comic book nerd, but I feel like just your general audience, they're going to watch this film and they're going to get it. They're going to understand it and be like, no, I didn't really have any problems understanding that. And that's impressive. That's what makes this movie great. And if you're watching this, it is in competition for my top 10 of the year. I'm not going to tell anybody else that but you. But this movie, the way it's constructed, it's kind of brilliant. The way that they did. I mean, it truly, truly is. I loved it. I absolutely love No Way Home. Can't wait to see it again here in about an hour. So I better hurry up and record. I'm keeping Spider-Man 2 at the 2 spot because this film is using that simplicity of having one villain, one focus, one concurrent storyline, and the idea of Peter Parker being so conflicted with what he's having to do, balance his personal life with being Spider-Man, and we've seen that in multiple movies, but I think this does the best job of it, and not being Spider-Man anymore. I mean, going away from what makes him a hero, not embracing what his uncle told him to embrace, even though the world needs him because there's someone rising, and that is Alfred Molina as Doc Ock. Now, Doc Ock, we've seen him twice now. He's amazing in No Way Home. But this was, and the way Raimi treats it like a horror film when he turns into Dr. Octopus, we all know that scene. We all know pretty much all of the scenes that spawn from the brilliance of what this film is trying to do. It still keeps that cheesiness intact, and it has some things that we see carry over into the next movie that maybe don't even work as much, but iconic lines, so many memorable moments, and the scene of Spider-Man fighting Ock on the train still, to this day, even with questionable CGI, they were doing all they could, goes down as one of the best and coolest and most epically shot and beautiful Spider-Man action scenes, well, superhero action scenes we've ever seen. I love this movie, and this is where we talk about Elfman's score. Elfman's score, absolutely phenomenal. There's no way, it may come to pass eventually, but there's no way I could listen to a Spider-Man score and say, yeah, that's better than Elfman's score. It's just too epic. It's too good. The intro is amazing. I love this film. If there is a knock or two on it, it's just, again, we come back to some of the Raimi-isms like cheesy line delivery, that one scene where his tentacle goes into the wall and that girl's screaming and running towards the camera. It's like, okay, that's stupid. Why are we doing that? But for the most part, I think the movie is spectacular. One of my favorite comic book movies of all time. Let's move into number one. I don't know, guys. It's hard for me to put anything above this at this point. It's my number one movie of 2018. It still does for Spider-Man, for Peter Parker, for Miles Morales, for all the Spider-Man and the pig that they bring in. It does for Spider-Man everything I've ever wanted to see on the big screen. I was shocked walking out of this film. I had no clue it was going to be as good as it was. Incredible animation, a phenomenal art style, the detail. So all of that technical stuff that maybe I'm missing in some of these other Spider-Man movies, even though they're live action, this is animated, so you can go two different routes, but I get in this movie, I get the style, I get the epic soundtrack, I get the score, which is amazing, and the moment where Miles is, obviously going through the buildings, the upside down shot, the music, oh my God. It's still one of the coolest. It may go down as top 3 comic book movie moments ever. I don't care if it's animated. I know someone who refused to watch this because it was animated. I mean, they were just like, I'm not doing it. It's for kids. And I'm like, God, come on, man. This is some of the best, most brilliant thematic moments you'll ever see from Spider-Man. It'll make you fall in love with Miles Morales. It's a different kind of story because we're always seeing Peter. Now we see Miles, even though we get two Peters, one Miles. And they finally watched it, came back to me and said, I loved it. It was brilliant. And that's what it is. It's absolutely brilliant. And the hype for Across the Universe, I believe that's what it's called, part 1 and 2, is so high because so many people love this. And a couple that say it's overrated. And that's, I guess, it is that high. So I can understand people thinking it's overrated. I do not feel that. I believe I've watched this movie 8 to 10 times, and every time I watch it, I find something new, or I find a moment or a line of dialogue, or just the style of it all. And I love a movie that showcases detail. And the detail that goes into this film is brilliant. There's nothing beyond brilliant, and it introduced us to the idea of the multiverse. Guys, love this film so much. I love this movie so much. All right, folks, had to change into something a bit more classy for this viewing of Spider-Man. Now, I am going to see it a third time, and I may wear my suit to the theater, but we're not there yet. I appreciate you guys so much for tuning into this video, talking our love of Spider-Man, and we're not done. I may be re-ranking the villains at some point this weekend, and if you'd like to see it, drop your thumbs up for a brand new Marvel Cinematic Universe tier list. It's a big one, but I want to do as much as I can. Spoiler review coming later today. I'll see you guys very soon.